looking forward to meet you physically. But
Yeah,
then,
I will. Yeah.
understandable reasons, it was cancelled.
No, sir, I will see if I can get onto your schedule once I come to Delhi the next time. I'll
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
want to do that.
And Sai also. I've not met her. I don't
Yes,
think we've
So
met for
I
quite
think we
some
are
time.
starting.
yes.
So we are
Was
going
really
live now.
expecting to meet you in the Bhubaneswar Kalinga
Yes.
Literature Festival, but I guess it was budget preparation time for
Yeah.
all you guys.
So, sir, the program is on now.
Ah,
So, a very warm namaste to all the readers and viewers of Garuda Books and people who have joined this live program. And as you all know, this is regarding the book launch of a book, or one of our latest titles, Battle of Vathapi, Nandi's Charge. Uh, it's been written by Dr. Arun Krishnan. He is there. And joining us today for this book launch is none other than Dr. Bibek Roy. He is the chairman, Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. We all very know him very well. And of course, in terms of his scholarship, I don't need to say much. We don't need to say much. He has translated Mahabharat and Valmiki Ramayana in English. And also joining us today is Saiswaroopa ji. She's a fiction writer. She has written many books, and most of it, I have a feeling that she has drawn the characters from our ancient texts. And one of her books is on Draupadi. So maybe she will talk about all those things later. As of now, to start with, I am asking the author to introduce the book and tell us how he chose this genre and how did this book actually come into being. Arunji?
Sure. Thank you, Prashantji. So I started writing this book almost 10 years ago. I mean, obviously, I'm not a historian, and this is my debut novel. So I was always interested in writing. Also, always interested in history. Once I left school, because in school none of us really enjoyed the history that was taught to us. Maybe because of the way it was taught to us. But I was an avid reader of historical fiction, even in English, Alexander Dumas and Victor Hugo and the others. Uh, but my actual passion for this came about because of the great Tamil writer Kalki Krishnamurti. He had written historical fiction uh, about the Choras, about the Pallavas, the Chalukyas, etc. So to me, that was just fascinating reading his book. And when I did that, I wanted to write something myself. So I started this 10 years ago. It was going on in spurts. I'd done a fair bit of research for this. But then only over the last year or so, I actually put my mind to it and finished it. So yeah, and the book is about, it is set in the 7th century of the Common Era, and it recounts the Battle of Vathapi, which happened in 642 of the Common Era between the Pallava king Narasimhavarma Pallavan, based out of Kanchi, and the great Chalukya king Pulikeshi II, based out of Vathapi and what is now called Badami. So this talks about the preparations. The first book talks about the preparations on the Pallava side, how they went about strategizing, the eventual conquest of Vathapi.
Okay, that was a great introduction, Arunji. Uh, just to take this a bit forward, historical fiction as a genre is getting popular, and you have given some bit of background on the fact that you are already interested in historical fiction. You were reading books. So my question would be that when we are talking about 7th century southern India, the interactions between Pallava and Chalukyas and other kingdoms, how did you imagine it? Because is there enough, documented history as such, or did you imagine? So can you just give us an idea, like how much of it is a documented fact and how much of it is an imagination of yours?
Look, the documentation is very sparse in the sense that there were these string of battles. You kind of know which kings were allied together on one side or on the other. Apart from that, everything else is fictional in the sense the kind of India. So if you've read enough history, the kind of India that was there at that time, and then you just let your mind get creative about displaying it. One of the interesting bits is because I'm a South Indian, and South India still has. So I hail from Tanjore, and that land is just steeped in temples and old temples. I mean, in Tanjore, if you find anything less than 500 years old, that's considered modern, right? So all those temples are really, really old. And so you kind of have a feel for what life must have been like in those days, and the kinds of architecture and so on. So you try and weave a plausible story around it.
Okay, and one more question I would like to take before we proceed further, I would like to put to you is that when you are researching for the book, it often happens to us, to all of our people who are into Indic literature or trying to rediscover our past, that we come to know various things which we never, which we thought never existed about our own culture, about our own ancient stories or structures. I mean, temples, of course, temples in South are a fabulous advertisement of what our culture used to be. But apart from that, what else did you come to know about your own, culture, and sort of, if I can use the word, got shocked that okay, this is also happening, or this also is there?
I don't think there was any particular thing that shocked me, but something that I learned, which is pleasant to me, was the fact of about how interconnected the whole of India was, right? So when we are taught history, we are taught North Indian history separately, and then you are taught there were these kingdoms in the south. If you think about it, the reason I picked this century is it was a very, very interesting century. So you had Harshavardhan in the north of the Narmada River. Then you had Pulikeshi, who was dominating what are now parts of North Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, what we call Madhya Pradesh now. All of those were under his rule. Then you had the Pallavas, you had the Pandyas as well, and you have the Gangas. More interestingly, you had kings in Sri Lanka, and what a lot of Indians and what we are never taught in school is how interconnected South Indian history was with the Sri Lankan history, because there was this Sri Lankan kings would interfere in South Indian disputes and vice versa. And so, if you think about it, Pulikeshi was like the bridge between the North Indian empire of Harshavardhana and the purely South Indian empire of the Pallavas. And so there was this interconnectedness, and there are other examples of it, all the shivlings and Shakti Peeths and all, which are all over India. So obviously people were doing going about with trade and everything all through India. But I just found it fascinating that even the kings were so interconnected that the Sri Lankan kings helped Pallavas. There was a rival Sri Lankan king who held the Chalukyas. So and think about how that to me was very fascinating.
Okay, thank you, Arunji, for that. Before we proceed, I think it's a customary thing. Had it been a physical event which we all wanted, we would have definitely got up and showed the book. So I request all our guests and author to just show to the viewers the book for which today we are having this program. And maybe if situation improves as we are hoping, then someday we would obviously be holding a physical offline program. So this is Battle of Vathapi, Nandi's Charge. This is actually first of a trilogy which Arunji has planned. I'll ask him a bit to explain that also, and then we will move further. So Arunji, can you please tell us how have you planned this trilogy, or uh, uh, I mean, how is the body of a documented work enough to stretch it over a trilogy, or will you be using your imagination as as an author?
No, like I said, it has to be a lot of it is imagination, right? Because we know there were 4 battles fought. Now, how were those 4 battles fought? Who are the people involved? What happened in between? How did they plan it? That's where the creative writing part of it comes in. And so when I thought about it, see, if I made it into one book, it's like this, right? It's, do you want to make it into a web series or do you want to make it into a 2-hour movie? I thought making it into a web series was better because it gives you more freedom to write more expansively. So just in the way I was thinking of this, I was thinking of this on a grand scale where one book wouldn't do it justice.
So all the viewers and readers who are listening to this, if you are interested in a web series on this kind of theme, you may like to contact the author. That that's one of the things which can come out of this. Anyways, now I request Dr. Bibek Debroy ji to share his views on the book. He has, I must tell readers that he has praised the book. His endorsement is there, and sir, I would like to start with one question about historical fiction again, because we are discussing a book that is in the category of historical fiction. Uh, how do you see this in the overall phenomenon of rediscovering our past, the ancient Indian past? How do you see this genre of historical fiction coming into play? Please, sir.
Thank you. And thank you, Arunji, for giving me the opportunity to read the book even before it was published, which means I cannot resist pulling your leg a little bit. Uh, when you responded to the question, you said it took you 10 years to write the book, which explains to me why the prologue starts in 6:30 and then we jump 11 years before the rest of it begins to happen.
That's a
But
good
that
catch.
apart, um, before again I respond to the question, let me mention something that is important to mention, that all of us as readers should be thankful to Garuda Prakashan, not only for this book, but for a series of books that Garuda has been bringing out. On the question of historical fiction, I think the first point I'd like to make is that historical fiction per se is not new. Historical fiction has been written for decades, except that earlier the historical fiction often used to be written in non-English languages. And in all of our languages, we will be familiar with great authors who have written historical fiction. In Bengali, everyone will probably know that Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay wrote historical fiction. Other than the Bengalis, and of course people like Arun who knows Bengali, people may not know that Ramesh Chandra Datta wrote historical fiction, excellent historical fiction. What I think is different is that now increasingly historical fiction is being written in the English language. But as a genre, it's not completely new. The advantage of writing in English is Kalki's fiction. I have never read. I'm unable to read it. It's not possible for me to read Kalki's fiction. But because Arun and people like Arun are writing in English, I can now savor that part of history. And it is unfortunately the case that our savoring of history has been very biased. And let me give you a personal example. relating to the kind of schooling that I had. I studied in two kinds of schools. In the first kind of school, the first school was a so-called Western missionary school. Thanks to that education, I know that the Battle of Agincourt was in 1415. I know that the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. In the second half, I moved to a more Indian school. And in that Indian school, what I learned was the history of the Mughal Empire. Consequently, I know the names of all the Mughal emperors. But never have I been taught the history of the Ahom dynasty, which lasted for a considerably longer amount of time than the Mughal Empire, nor did I ever learn about the Pallavas, the Chalukyas, the Pandyas. So, in a sense, all of us have been ignorant about important episodes of Indian history. You asked Arunji a question about documentation. Partly that documentation answer depends on the timeline. For this particular timeline, we may not have all the details. We may not know the name of every protagonist, but we know by and large the trends without the individual incidents, as compared to, suppose I were to be writing historical fiction for a period that Amish Tripathi writes about. So it's important to understand that for this period that Arun is writing about, documentation is better. And I think what it is important for any person who's writing this to do is to ensure that yes, this is fiction, but let me ensure that I'm not doing violence to history as has been documented, however imperfectly. And let me appreciate, and this is an important point which many authors often get wrong, let me get the geography of the place right. What appeals to me about this particular book is A, it tells me about a history of one particular part of the country that I'm not that familiar with, and B, the geography sort of comes alive. I think there is a side question about how important this kind of historical fiction is. The problem is that quite often we do a very bad job of documenting our history, not as fiction, but as fact. For example, Arun mentioned Harshavardhana. Where did Harshavardhana rule from? Where was his capital? Thaneshwar. If you go to Thaneshwar, which is actually adjacent to Kurukshetra, you will find a lot of documentation about Kurukshetra. About Thaneshwar, excavations have not happened for years. There is little that is available there. There is little that is known. Or if you go to Hastinapur, little has been excavated, little is known. Ditto for Ahichatra, ditto for Kampilya. And in some sense, in searching out our roots, this historical fiction, even though it is fiction, is plugging that gap.
So, sir, in a sense, this also could be seen as a genre which will spike more interest and go take us towards a direction where we actually get to unearthing our history and setting it right. Will that be a right thing to say, sir?
Yes, that is correct. But in addition, we also get used to certain words. You see, English may have started off as a colonial language, but I personally think we have Indianized it. And therefore, many words which are traditionally non-English words have willingly have entered the English language. So when Arun uses the word Veshti, I'm completely comfortable with that because now Veshti has entered the language. I, of course, have a complaint about him about now not giving the same treatment to words like Nimesha and Muhurta and Yojana. I see no particular reason why you single those out when you have so many other words that you are freely using. But anyway, so this part is also important. I think the language that is being used.
May I come in briefly here, sir?
It's okay.
Please.
No,
Please.
I actually agonized over that. I had written the entire book using Nimisha and Muhurta and stuff like that. And then when I was reading it, it struck me that maybe for an unwary reader, it might cause a lot of, you have to convert your yojanas into yards or kilometers or whatever. So that was the reason I switched everything back later on.
No, on this, let's not bother too much about this. But the reason I would have liked you to keep a word like Nimesha is that someone would have been intrigued, some reader would have been intrigued, would have read up about it, and would have discovered it is linked to the story about King Nimi. So the person would have got exposed to that story. But this is a minor point.
Okay, Saiswaroopa ji, you have been listening all this while. I would like to put a couple of questions to you also. Since you have written, if I'm not wrong, you have, apart from Draupadi, also you have written books based on characters from our ancient Indian texts. Is that correct? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, yes. Yes, Prashant ji.
Yes. In that sense, whenever a person is trying this genre, especially historical fiction, one of the questions is interpretation, right? About what is, one of course is imagination, and then there is the documented part, and then there is interpretation. How do you see it? Because as far as I could find out, in Draupadi, you have attempted an interpretation of Draupadi which is completely different from what it was made in the popular culture, so to say. So please tell us a bit about that.
So, yes, I know we are discussing historical fiction, and I also maintain that Mahabharata and Puranic fiction is also, Puranas are also part of our history, which has been documented in a different manner than the way we learnt documentation from Western, our Western historians. So yes, coming to the Puranic part, Itihasa, Purana, Upanishadic part, this is just my personal belief as to how fiction writers have to approach those men and women of those periods. So say Bhagavan Vedavyasa, the way he has narrated and the way we see discussions happening in Naimisharanya between Janamejaya and Vaishampayana, between Parikshit and Shukha Maharshi, right? There is an adhikara of the listener. The listener is not unaware of that story, but is seeking deeper knowledge through that story. Because it would be ridiculous to think that Janamejaya did not know the story of his own great grandfather, and he has come to the ashram of Vaishampayana to know his own history. It's not really believable. He knows it, but he is seeking deeper knowledge, which is why we have such a exhaustive text of Mahabharata.
Sorry
Then
to interrupt, Sarupaji. This is exactly what we are facing now. Probably we
yes,
are
yes. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. So
our grandfathers, we are losing that connect, isn't that? So probably Janmeja is not so impossible.
Sure.
please
So
please
when the
continue.
rishis narrate, there is a different aim for that story, which is a layered approach. There is a physical way of storytelling. There is a spiritual interpretation. There would be a yogic interpretation from all the schools of thought. There would be some interpretation which is possible. That is the Harsha way of storytelling. But now in the modern period, we are pushing the story. No story seeker is like Parikshit or Janamejaya. They have left their duties for 15 days, 40 days, 7 days, whatever, and they have dedicated the attention. The story seekers are not dedicating their attention, but it's our duty as storytellers to push some interesting parts of that history, so that just like Bibek ji said, some of those readers will be intrigued, and they start delving into the original texts, and that's how knowledge spreads. And I think that should be the main aim of fiction writers. It's to kindle that interest. And also I maintain, especially on the way to interpret ancient texts, I follow uh, interpretation of my own. We have the episode of Ganga Avatarana from Ramayana, right? Bhagiratha, he does tapasya to pacify Ganga and bring her to so and so place, so that his ancestors, their curse is redeemed and they reach the Pitrulokas. He has, his aim is noble, and he has that single point focus. But when Ganga actually comes down, she has a journey of her own. Ultimately she reaches the place where Bhagiratha wanted her to reach. She fulfills the purpose, but all the way she diverges, reconverges, and has a journey of, and blesses so many people and so many settlements along her journey, right? So that way I think the reach of the storyteller has to be wide. It cannot be like the highway. History is the highway, documentation is the highway, and the storyteller's path traverses along the highway, but along these small settlements, trying to observe life and bringing life into that history, but ultimately reach the place where history has reached. So these, the kind of, I feel personally, I have a personal grouse against misinterpretations and distortions, especially because you spoke about Draupadi. So this interpretation about Draupadi having a soft corner for Karna is something which I really cannot tolerate. So I think those are the distortions that we as storytellers need to avoid, because one thing, it springs from what do you say? I think we should not make the mistake of thinking of ourselves as smarter than Vedavyasa, which we can never be. So, but as long as we consider Vedavyasa as a guide, I guess our stories also have some a way to have a small smart spark. He's like the sun, and we have we are like planets drawing some kind of light from him.
Arunji, I would like to put this question to you also, because again, as when you are conjuring a plot line for what could have happened, as you already mentioned in your book, that this is not itihasa, but as it might have happened. So, in terms of interpretation, also, like how do you see? How did you visualize the life? I mean, the kind of society, the kind of milieu that existed at that point. Because, there is a king who is bringing up a very exquisite temple complex, the Mahabalipuram, that is happening. In fact, Tamil Nadu and other states have a very rich culture of temple towns even today. Entire towns are centered around temples, and there is an entire economy and society is there. So how did you visualize those that period? Can you just tell our viewers about it?
See, one of my firm beliefs is that humankind has remained the same over the ages. Okay, we all react the same way. We have the same emotions, anger, jealousy, the same motivations for doing things. So just because a king was there, 1400 years ago, doesn't mean his motivations would have been any different. Yeah, sure, he was a devout Shaivite and he was building temples and so on. But ultimately, he must have been a realist and a practical man, right? He's a king of a kingdom, which means he's going to look at his enemies. He's going to look at expanding his kingdom. So that's how I treated it. I kind of looked into it as a more of a political struggle that's going on. And if I were in that situation, what would happen? How would I plan it? The other thing I tried to do in this book, I don't know how successful I've been, is to not make, usually in a lot of historical fiction, if they're writing about the king becomes the central focus, and he does everything. Like, he goes and he does the spying, he does the. So my point was, if Narasimhavarma, Pallava, and Pulikeshi are not immediately going to set out and fight, if they are going to do strategies, and if they're going to send out spies and stuff, there will be foot soldiers who are doing all that. And I wanted to tell the story from the point of view of those foot soldiers, in a sense. The fact that while the king and his generals do all the strategizing, what actually gets done is by the foot soldiers. And that's kind of how I tried to write this. I don't know how successful I've been at it, but that was my intention when I was thinking about the overall the story and the way it moves forward.
So if I can interject there, I guess you have succeeded in that field very well, Arun, because I think the world building that has happened of the Pallava times, it has really built on these, commoners' perspectives, their festivals, the way of their traveling. Everything has built upon the commoner's point of view. That is something where you have wonderfully succeeded.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Sir, my question to Bibek ji is that as somebody who has translated something like Mahabharat and Ramayana, which has its translation has its own codes and ethics. I need not be. I'm not much aware about that. But how do you see this question of interpretation? Because there will be, some sort of subjectivity does come in at some stage when we are looking back to our own ancient texts or history or however it is documented. So, can you please tell us a bit about that, sir?
I'll take the question a little bit differently, because there is a suggestion in your question that historical fiction has interpretation, but history does not. That is not the case.
Yes.
What is projected as history is also very subjective. It depends on the lens one is using. It is also amenable to interpretation. When I am embarking on a task of writing historical fiction, obviously I have to use my imagination, because it is, after all, fiction. What I need to ensure is two points that I made earlier. I need to ensure that whatever is documented about history is not out of line. My interpretation should be within the confines of whatever is known to be documented history. That interpretation should not do violence to the geography. And something else that I did not mention earlier, it should not do violence to customs, in violence in terms of interpretation, to customs, to attire, to ornaments that were worn. Within that latitude, and as long as I'm not indulging in unnecessary sacrilege, I think everything is fine, because the reader knows that this is fiction. And what will hopefully happen is some reader will now think that, all right, Arun Krishnan has hooked me into this part of this period of India's history. Now I will go and read up Nilkantha Shastri. Or the tourist who goes to Kanchi, or the tourist who goes to Mahabalipuram will be better informed. Because history and books on history are perceived to be dry, I think what historical fiction does is, at least in the minds of some readers, triggers an interest. And the reader knows that this is not, within quotes, history, this is fiction, but now you've got me interested, so I will delve further. That, I think, is the role of all historical fiction.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And I think on that count, you would give full marks to this book. That it will.
Yes, you see, let me respond to something that you asked earlier, and Sai
Yes, sir.
responded.
Sure, sir.
Um, this is one of the difficulties, and I'm using the word difficulty in a positive sense with reading this book, because it is not only about kings. There are a lot of characters floating around, and sometimes you lose track of who is what. So you have to go back and look at the list to say, so and so is so and so. And I'm saying this as a positive, because there is a difference between a novel and a long story. A long story is typically from the point of view of a single protagonist. A novel has views of multiple protagonists. So this is actually a novel. And I'm saying this, as I said, as a plus, because there are a lot of people there, including the ones who are part of history, including a few who may or may not be a part of history, but they figured in Kalki, and therefore Arun has adapted them. And there are plenty of others, including common people.
Right. So thank you so much. Arunji, I would like to put a question to you regarding one of the characters, which is one of your favorites, Naga Nandi. And it is also, as you say in the book, you have drawn from Kalki's book. Uh, so just give us a little idea of what this character is and why is he so important in this particular, novel and the further ones that are coming up.
Sure. So Naganandi was in Kalki's book Sivagami in Sabadam, which is exactly about this war between the Pallavas and the Chalukyas. Naganandi is the spy chief of the Chalukyas. So when I was searching around for the name for that spy chief for the Chalukyas, I wanted to as a gentle hat tip to the giant that Kalki was, and I keep saying that I love this North Indian habit when when classical musicians or musicians speak of their gurus, they always touch their ears. And so when I talk about Kalki, I should keep doing this because um, I'm so enamored of him, and I've been, I think of him as like a guru. So when I was thinking about the character, I thought, okay, you know what? I must use the name Naganandi because that was a powerful, powerful character in Shivagami Shabadam by Kalki. So that's how the name came about.
And at one place in your book, in one of the chapters, you are mentioning that the Pallavas know that they failed earlier because the spies, their intelligence and security system was not in place, and now they are trying to revive it and make it very strong. And then they are having a too much load of information. They are having too much intelligence which they are able to figure out. So it must be Naganandi's doing. So if it does not amount to revealing too much, can you just tell the viewers a bit about how the Pallavas could have got the better of him?
No, so the point I was trying to make, again, I was drawing from modern, how, if you think about how Raw was, I heard, and again, this is all hearsay for me from what I read, the agents were decimated sometime in the 70s in Pakistan, and then we had to get back. And given all the information warfare that goes on with disinformation, not just misinformation, I kind of said, okay, you know what? If Chanakya 2,300 years ago could talk about all this, it means all these folks, Chanakya was only about 900 years old for them. So the impact of Chanakya on that time period must have been much higher, which means they must have read the Arthashastra like it was some training manual. And so if you're talking about, how to go about defeating someone, the whole spycraft, misinformation, disinformation, all that would come into play. And so I was trying to bring that also as one of the concepts.
Okay. Yes, sir. You want to say something?
Who? I?
Yes, sir. I felt you wanted to say
No,
something.
no,
In
no,
any
no, no.
case, okay. In any case, sir, we have a question, and I leave it to all three panelists on from one of our readers and viewer. He's Ritesh Arora, and he's asking, how does one begin research? So, who will take that question first?
Well, let me take it first. I think the way one begins
Sure,
research, I
sir.
presume research about something like this. I think one begins research by reading Arun's book first, because there is some research that has gone into it, and then one reads Nilkant Shastri. Research does not mean one digests whatever is freely floating around on the net. So there are steps to research. And the other thing I should say, it's not related to the question, is this is just the first volume. And we are still 1 year away from the famous Battle of Vathapi. So, history wise, we know what happened in the battle. But what every reader, I think, at the end of this book will look forward to is how is Arun going to treat the Battle of Vathapi? One is not asking him to divulge his thoughts about what the second volume is going to be and what the third volume is going to be. But I would like to make this point, I think, that although there are multiple protagonists, at least in this volume, quite clearly, the hero, if that is the word to be used, the hero clearly is Narasimhavarman in some sense, if the word hero is to be used. That is probably not necessarily true of Kalki. So that's all I wanted to say.
Sure.
Arunji, you would like to say something about research? Since you said that it took some 10 years, so what was the first spark? Can you just tell that?
Okay.
Tell
First of all, I would like to clarify that 10 years. The 10 years is my own laziness in terms of writing the book. I didn't research for 10 years. But, as Bibek ji said, Nilakanta Shastri is somebody I read fully. R.C. Majumdar, I've got the entire, 11 volume set by R.C. Majumdar. So he has a lot of information as well. So you kind of look again, if you think about what Vivek ji said, why did I do this research? I didn't do it at first. I did it because I had read Kalki. I got interested in that time period because I read Kalki, and then I went into do my own research. So I think once your imagination is caught by something. I mean, if you read the Hunchback of Notre Dame, once you read the book, then you think, oh, you know what, I need to read up more on Notre Dame, or when I go to Paris, I must visit Notre Dame and see what it is about. So I think that's how you do it. You first, something catches your attention, and then you try and delve more into it. There are, there's so much research going on, so many more eloquent, well-researched authors who are writing on it. I think there's a lot of material. Information is not in short supply in our day and age.
Yes, quite true.
You're muted, Prashant.
Yeah. Sir, one of the questions is that when we read history in our school books and even various political at very different times after independence, a lot of things got embroiled into north versus south divide. So how do you see this kind of effort coming from authors and people from all sides, from all directions of the country, if I can say that? So how do you see this, breaking those barriers, artificial as they were, and creating that sense of that the whole of country belongs to all of us? How do you see this?
Is that directed
Yes, sir.
to me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There was no
Um,
problem.
no, I would respond to it like this, and as Arun himself said, that this north, south, so on and so forth is a very artificial divide. Um, it was partly because of the colonial legacy. It was partly because of the great deal of emphasis placed in the teaching of history on the Mughal period, or broadly the Muslim period. Bharatvarsha was integrated Bharatvarsha. Whether it is Uttarapat, whether it is Dakshinapat, it was an integrated part. The trouble is, we have an impression sometimes that it was only integrated under Akbar or whoever it may be. That is not the case. So I don't think the issue is with the fact of Bharatvarsha being integrated. The issue is the way history is often conventionally taught, where the history that is taught is typically a history that characterizes only what today we would call the Hindi heartland. Now, what this kind of telling of history does is it educates us that look, there was a pre-Islamic period. It is not that Bharatvarsha did not exist before the pre-Islamic period. It is not that Bharatvarsha did not exist before the British. Bharatvarsha existed. There were kingdoms, flourishing kingdoms. There were kingdoms that were larger than the kingdoms of the Mughals. And it is an important message that this kind of fiction delivers, which is that this history, this itihasa, it existed. And let me at least as a reader get an exposure to that through fiction. And eventually, then I will begin to appreciate the nuances of history.
Right. So thank you so much for that. Arunji, one last question. I think we would be running short of time after a while. But still, the period you are addressing is 7th century CE, which uh, is very closely related. In terms of the way history unraveled, that this was the period after which these invasions, especially from the Islamic these chieftains and all, started happening, and gradually things began changing within the Indian mainland, if I can say that. So, how do you see the politics of this period? Because whatever happens in a particular period, it has a bearing on the immediate future. So, do you see the some of the issues of politics? Related to politics, which probably proved detrimental to the interests of our Sanatan India? Because I'm just referring to the time period because it is very close to the time period after which, at least in north and to some extent in south also, the invasion started happening, and the resistance was put up, but it was probably not that strong, or not what it should have been.
I would disagree. I think the
Mhm.
resistance was extremely strong. The fact that all of us exist today, that India is still, majorly Sanatanic, is because we put up a resistance. I mean, somewhere I read that it took 15 years for the Islamic invasions or the Arab invasions of Iran to completely eradicate the native culture. Didn't happen to us. So I would actually strongly disagree with the notion that we didn't fight. We fought all the way through, which is why we still exist. So that's one. I don't think so. This happens about maybe about 100 years before that. The fascinating period here is, see, at this point in time, Buddhism and Jainism are actually the main, in a sense, they are ascendant. And the Bhakti movement has just started in the South. And Saiswaroopa probably knows way more about the Bhakti movement than I do. But so you have the, that's when, and then, even 200 years after this, if we agree with Adi Shankara's, timeline as we are taught it, Adi Shankara went and preached and set up the 4 mutts all over India. I think this was a time of, you had massive universities in Nalanda and Takshila still functional. This was a time of, great intellectual ferment in India, according to me. So we were just past the Gupta age, right? We were maybe 150 years after the Guptas, and we were maybe another 150 years before Mir Qasim, or 100 years before Mir Qasim came. So I think this was a time of great ferment. As far as trade was concerned, we had always traded with the Arabs from the port of Muziris on the Kerala coast. So that, so that wasn't new to us. And in fact, in the book, I talk about how one of the characters actually has an Arabian horse, excuse me, and not the Indian one. So just to show that there was trade happening even then.
Sorry. So right now we are coming to a close of this program. I would like to have final comments, whatever their views about the subjects we have discussed briefly in this program. So, sir, can you please start with your final comments?
Well, my final comments are very simple. Read the book. It's a wonderful book to read. What happens with a book like this, of course, is that one has to wait often for a considerable amount of time before the second volume surfaces. I hope it is not going to be 10 years. And by that time you've forgotten what happened in the first volume. One of the questions I have, it's not a question I have for Arun in particular. I have a question in general about many people who have written trilogies. That is it a better idea to publish them at one go rather than sequentially like this, if it is a trilogy? Or is it better to do it in the present form? I've had this problem with several trilogies, and yours is not the only one. So those are my final comments.
Saiswaroopa ji?
I would agree with Bibek Da and exhort everybody to buy your copy and read this wonderful account of the Pallava Chalukya dynamics here. I love the world building that has happened. It's a visual treat. It's like a tour, it's like a tour into the times of Pallavas and Chalukyas, and especially as a lover of temple visits, I loved the whole tapestry of geography that goes along with the story, and the pace is not sacrificed for descriptions. That shows the mastery of storytelling craft, Arunji. So congratulations again, and people watching this, please buy Nandi's charge and do spread the word among all the readers who are interested. And I guess Garuda Prakashan should look to publish more from this genre. That will get you more readers, and wish you both all the best.
Okay, thank you so much, Saiji. Arunji?
No, first of all, I want to thank Garuda Prakashan for taking a punt on me. I sent the book in with 100 pages written over 9.5 years, or 9 years, and you folks agreed to, felt it was okay to publish it. Thanks to both Bibek ji and to Saiswaroopa for reading the book and for providing, endorsement for it. It really helps because I figured if it could pass through such eminence and emerge unscathed, then I do have a chance with the others. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for taking time out to help with this launch. And like Vivek ji said, please read the book. Vivek ji, to your specific question, I've already started on the second book, so I'm hoping to complete that in another 4 to 5 months if I can, and then it's up to Garuda whether they want to bring it out immediately, later. That's their choice.
So,
there's just one
Arunji,
thing.
yes, sir.
If this part is over, there's just one thing I would like to say. If this part is over,
Yes,
that
sir.
you mentioned Draupadi, but I'd like to take this opportunity to say that people should also read Sai's Rukmini, which is also a wonderful book. I'm not sure whether, I don't remember whether Garuda published it or not. Even if Garuda did not publish it, please do read Rukmini.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Means a lot to me to hear that from you.
So, Arunji, if you remember, there was a tweet from one of our followers. I think it was on your timeline. He wanted to know that who was that man in that last chapter.
Oh yeah.
So, you want to reveal it now or 5-6 months later?
10 years
No, I
later.
think. Yeah. Oh no, certainly not 10 years, Vivek ji. Thank you so much.
So, right, viewers, we have had some wonderful comments and wonderful observations from people who obviously, who are uh, eminent in their own walks of life, plus their scholarly contribution is immense. And there are various things which came to, came to light in this program. So if you are a young person, you want to research, you have heard the comment of Dr. Bibek Debroy on how to go about it. You have heard about Arunji's experience on that and how to interpret it, and the basic core principles of research and interpretation when dealing with such things. These were also discussed. And of course, the biggest conclusion that I would like to draw from this program is that please read this book. I will again request all my guests to just show it to the readers once again. I think the cover is also good, Arunji.
I was very happy. Thank you.
Right.
Should we
And
show
then,
the price also? Should we show the price also?
sir, the links are there. The links are there. They will go and find out the price. So that's not a big issue. And these flags, Arunji, would you like to just tell the viewers a little bit about these flags? Because these are not just ordinary markers. They have the emblems. Can you just
Yeah.
briefly
So they
tell
have
our
the
viewers about it?
So they have the emblems. So for the Chalukyas, it is the Varaha, which was their emblem. And for the Pallavas, they used two. They used the Nandi and the Simha, interchangeably. So because I call this Nandi's charge, you have Nandi here. I think future books might have the Simha coming forth.
Right. So, well, we come to the end of this book launch program. And before we leave, I must thank Dr. Bibek Debroy ji for not only for being part of this program, but extending his best wishes and blessings for Garuda Prakashan. We will try to keep on bringing good, books like these as far and as soon and as expeditiously as possible. And Saiswaroopa ji, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing your views on various, aspects of historical fiction. And of course, Arunji, it's been pleasure having you on this program. And of course, we will look to host more programs in future. And of course, when things get better, hopefully the third wave of Omicron and all this subsides, then someday we might have a physical program, and to meet you all these people in flesh and blood, as they say, would be such a great opportunity for us. So thank you so much all for joining this program. And dear readers, the links are there in the broadcast, just below the screen. You can click on that. The book is also will be available on Amazon. So please buy this book, read, and the only thing that can be said is that it sheds light on a part of history that has somehow been relegated uh, to the footnotes of our history books. So please do read. It's a great book, and thank you so much. Namaste to all.
Namaste. Thank you.